My name is Renee Thompson, and I just turned 32 last week. Not that my family noticed. After years of organizing every holiday gathering and sending thoughtful gifts, I was met with complete silence on my birthday. No calls, no texts, nothing. I brushed it aside until I checked my bank account, a $100 charge from my mother for a family vacation package I knew nothing about. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear how I turned this betrayal into my liberation. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, as the eldest daughter, I learned early on what my role in the family was supposed to be. My younger siblings James and Amanda got to enjoy their childhoods, while my parents Diane and Robert focused almost exclusively on their careers and maintaining a perfect social image. The Thompson family looked flawless from the outside, but inside our home, the dynamics told a different story. By the time I turned 10, I had already become the unofficial family planner and emotional caretaker. While most kids my age were playing with friends or joining after-school clubs, I was checking family calendars, reminding everyone of appointments and making sure holiday celebrations happened. My parents were always too busy with important meetings or networking events to handle these minor details. I still remember my 8th grade piano recital. I had practiced for months mastering a challenging Chopin piece that my music teacher said showed exceptional talent. The auditorium filled with proud parents clutching flowers and cameras, but the 2 seats I had reserved remained empty all evening. When I returned home, Mom was on a business call and Dad was reviewing contracts. Neither asked how it went. "Someone needs to keep this family functioning," my mother would say whenever I showed signs of resentment. "You're so good at it, Renee. We count on you." Those words became both my prison and my identity. I learned to expect little acknowledgement while giving everything. Now at 32, I live in Seattle, having finally moved away from Denver 3 years ago. The physical distance helped, but the emotional patterns followed me across state lines. I work as a marketing specialist for a tech company, recently earning a promotion that should have felt more satisfying than it did. The truth is, I struggle with work-life balance because saying no still feels like a betrayal of whom I'm not always sure. My life in Seattle isn't lonely, though. I've cultivated a small circle of close friends who've become my chosen family. Zoe, my best friend since moving here, sees through my "I'm fine" facade and calls me out when I start putting everyone else's needs before my own. Mark and Danielle, a couple from my apartment building, include me in weekend hiking trips and holiday celebrations. Then there's Keisha from my office, whose blunt honesty about my people-pleasing tendencies initially stung but ultimately pushed me toward growth. My dating history reflects the same patterns established in my family. 3 serious relationships, all with partners who grew accustomed to my constant accommodation. My last boyfriend, Trevor, was genuinely surprised when I finally ended things after 2 years. "But we never fight," he protested. He was right, because I never told him when his actions hurt me. 6 months ago, I started therapy with Dr. Landry. In our first session, she asked a question that shook me. What would happen if you stopped managing everyone else's emotions? The thought alone triggered an anxiety attack. That's when I knew I needed to work on setting healthier boundaries, starting with family. Despite the neglect I experienced growing up, I carry tremendous guilt about living so far from my parents and siblings. Logic tells me they functioned fine before I was born and would survive without my constant emotional labor, but decades of conditioning aren't easily undone. The financial exploitation began subtly. In college, my parents would borrow money from my waitressing job for temporary expenses that were never repaid. When family gatherings happened, I somehow always ended up covering more than my fair share. Gift exchanges were painfully imbalanced. I'd spend weeks choosing thoughtful presents while receiving last-minute generic items. Family vacations followed a predictable pattern. I would research destinations, compare prices, create itineraries, and book accommodations. My reward would be criticism about minor details or complaints that I had chosen activities no one wanted to do, despite asking for input repeatedly. When I moved to Seattle, I attempted to establish some boundaries around money. The first time I declined to contribute to my sister's new car fund, My mother didn't speak to me for weeks. When I couldn't fly home for a cousin's baby shower, my father called to say I was tearing the family apart with selfishness. Each time I tried to break free from these patterns, the guilt-tripping intensified. The most frustrating part was that my family only seemed to call when they needed something: money advice, emotional support, or planning help. Conversations rarely included questions about my life, and when they did, my answers were barely acknowledged before the topic shifted back to their needs. As my 32nd birthday approached, I had modest expectations. After years of orchestrating elaborate celebrations for family members, I wasn't asking for anything extravagant. Just a phone call, a text message, or even a quick social media post acknowledging my existence would have been enough. Was that really so much to want? I made simple plans with my Seattle friends: dinner at my favorite Japanese restaurant, followed by drinks at a rooftop bar with a view of the Space Needle. Nothing fancy, but with people who actually wanted to celebrate me. Throughout my birthday, I kept checking my phone. Each time the screen lit up, I felt a flutter of hope that quickly died when I saw it wasn't from family. By mid-afternoon, that hope had withered into a familiar resignation. I tried telling myself it didn't matter that I was being childish for wanting acknowledgement from people who had consistently shown they couldn't provide it. Maybe they're planning a surprise, suggested the optimistic voice in my head that somehow survived decades of disappointment. Maybe they'll call later, it whispered as evening approached. Time zones, it offered weekly as the day slipped away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just last month, I had organized a surprise virtual party for my dad's 60th birthday, coordinating 20 relatives across 4 time zones. For Amanda's 28th, I had custom jewelry made featuring her daughter's birthstone. When James got his promotion, I sent a gourmet gift basket to his office. Each celebration meticulously planned, each gift selected with care. Over lunch, Zoe noticed my frequent phone checks. "Still nothing from the Thompson crew?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "They're probably busy," I said automatically. "Renee, it takes 10 seconds to send a text message. Nobody is that busy." Maybe they forgot. "That's not any better. Look, I know they're your family, but this pattern is ridiculous. You deserve basic consideration." I nodded but changed the subject. Deep down, I had made a small decision: I wouldn't call them first. It wasn't much of a boundary, but it was something. For once, I wouldn't repair the bridge they kept burning. That evening at dinner, my friends made sure I felt celebrated. Keisha made a toast that brought tears to my eyes, and Mark and Danielle gifted me beautiful hiking boots for our weekend adventures. Messages from coworkers and acquaintances arrived throughout the day, proving that people who had known me for a fraction of the time my family had could remember this basic date. During dessert, I made the mistake of checking social media. My mother had posted that very day a lengthy update about her garden's progress with multiple photos. James had checked in at a concert, having apparently splurged on front-row tickets. Amanda had shared a shopping trip haul, including an expensive purse she totally deserved as a treat. They had time. They had money for self-indulgence. What they didn't have was any awareness of how their silence affected me. Or worse, maybe they were perfectly aware and simply didn't care. I maintained a brave face with my friends, laughing and enjoying the evening despite the hollow feeling in my chest. They had gone to such effort to make the night special, and I wouldn't let my family's neglect poison that gift. But when I returned to my apartment and kicked off my shoes in the quiet darkness, the weight of being forgotten by the people who should remember you most settled heavily on my shoulders. The next morning, I woke to a notification from my banking app. Groggy and still nursing a mild hangover from birthday cocktails, I opened it expecting to see the restaurant charge from the previous night. Instead, I stared in confusion at a much larger sum, $3,100 transferred from my account to my mother's. My first thought was fraud. Someone had hacked my account. I sat up straight, fully awake now, heart pounding. But the transfer description read, Thompson Family, Hawaii, 2023, and had been processed using my mother's verified payment request system that we had set up years ago for family emergencies. As I was about to call the bank, a text message from my mother appeared. Thanks for your portion of the Hawaii trip. Everyone's so excited for June. Got a great deal on the beachfront property James found. I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. Hawaii trip. June beachfront property. This was the first I'd heard of any of it. And your portion. That implied I was going, except no one had actually invited me. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my phone. The room seemed to spin as a panic attack took hold. Chest tightening, breathing, shallow vision blurring at the edges. The betrayal was so complete, so casually delivered that my body reacted before my mind could fully process it. They had forgotten my birthday entirely, but they had remembered to charge me $100 for a family vacation I knew nothing about. My fingers fumbled as I tried to call my mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. After the fifth attempt, I switched to text messages. What Hawaii trip? I never agreed to pay for anything. Please call me immediately. 20 minutes passed with no response. The panic had morphed into something darker. A cold, clear rage that made my previous resentments seem like mild annoyances. This wasn't a forgotten birthday card or an insensitive comment. This was theft disguised as family obligation. I called my brother James next. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice cautious. Hey, Renee. What's up? What's up? Are you serious right now? Mom just charged me $3,000 for a trip nobody told me about. A long pause. Oh, that. Yeah. I thought she was going to talk to you about that last week. Well, she didn't. What's going on, James? How could you all plan a family vacation without even mentioning it to me? His discomfort was palpable even through the phone. Look, it's not like that. We've been talking about it in the family chat for months. Everyone's contributed their share. What family chat? Another pause. The WhatsApp group. The one Mom started after Christmas. I'm not in any WhatsApp group, James. Oh, his voice got smaller. I just assumed you were busy and not responding. You know how you get with work and stuff. I ended the call before saying something unforgivable and immediately phoned my sister Amanda. Unlike James, she didn't pretend ignorance. We thought you wouldn't want to come, she said flatly. You're always talking about how busy you are in Seattle. Plus you missed Easter and Dad's birthday. So you decided to charge me anyway, for a trip I'm not even invited to. Mom said you'd want to contribute since it's a family thing. Everyone's going, Aunt Susan, Uncle Rick, even Grandma. Mom said you make the most money out of all of us, so your portion should reflect that. The conversation revealed that planning for this Hawaii trip had begun 3 months ago. 3 months of discussions, decisions, and arrangements, all without a single word to me. I discovered there was indeed a family group chat with 15 members, everyone except me. I found evidence of the planning on social media, 2 cryptic posts I had overlooked about Countdown to Paradise and Family Adventure 2023. There was even a private Facebook group someone had created called Thompson Takeover Hawaii Edition that included distant cousins I barely spoke to, but again, not me. My mother finally called back that afternoon. Instead of an apology, she launched into a detailed explanation of how they had assumed I was too busy to join them. You're always saying how demanding your job is, honey. We didn't want to pressure you to take time off. But family is family, and everyone contributes to Thompson gatherings. So you decided I should pay without being included. How does that make any sense? Don't be so dramatic, Renee. We thought you'd want to help give your grandmother this experience. It might be her last big trip, you know. She's not getting any younger. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost impressive. Of course they would invoke Grandma to justify the unjustifiable. My father called next, claiming there had been a miscommunication. According to him, my mother had definitely mentioned the trip during our last phone call 2 weeks ago. She hadn't. I would have remembered something that significant. But arguing felt pointless. It was his word against mine, and in my family, my word had always carried less weight. James called back later, more forthcoming now that the secret was exposed. To be honest, Renee, I think Mom and Dad thought you would just pay without coming. They kept saying how you're always working and wouldn't be able to take the time off anyway. So this way you could still be part of it. Amanda was blunter in her follow-up call. You don't enjoy family gatherings anyway. You're always tense and end up doing all the work while everyone else has fun. We thought this might be easier. Even my aunt got involved, calling to check on me, but really to defend my parents. In the Christmas photos, you looked so unhappy, dear. We all noticed. Your mother thought you might appreciate not having to pretend this time. The truth slowly crystallized. They wanted my money, not my presence. I had always been the family ATM and event coordinator, never a full participant worthy of inclusion. The forgotten birthday wasn't an oversight. It was a symptom of how they truly saw me. With a detective's determination, I began uncovering deeper patterns. I searched through old emails, finding evidence of other family events I hadn't been told about: a cousin's graduation party, a summer barbecue at my parents' lake house, even a weekend trip to Las Vegas that James, Amanda, and my parents had taken just 2 months after I moved to Seattle. My financial records told an even more damning story. In the past 5 years alone, I had loaned my family over $12,000 that was never repaid. I had contributed to wedding gifts, baby shower presents, and group vacations at a rate nearly triple what my siblings had. For Amanda's wedding, I had paid for the photographer, the flowers, and half the catering bill, a total that exceeded what many people spend on their entire wedding. I found old journal entries documenting years of emotional neglect. Holidays where I cooked and cleaned while others relaxed. Family photos where I was behind the camera instead of in the frame. Celebrations where my achievements were footnotes, while my siblings' accomplishments were headline news. I scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Landry, who listened without interruption as I poured out the whole sordid story. When I finished, she said something that stopped me cold. Renee, this isn't just emotional neglect. This is financial abuse. The word abuse hung in the air between us. I had never considered that what my family was doing could be categorized that way. Wasn't abuse something more dramatic, more intentional? Abuse doesn't have to include shouting or physical violence, Dr. Landry explained. It's about power and control. Your family has systematically trained you to provide resources, emotional, practical, and financial, without expecting anything in return. That's exploitation. That evening, I called my childhood friend Tara, who had witnessed my family dynamics for years. Her perspective was equally blunt. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, Renee. Do you remember your 16th birthday? Your parents forgot that one too. You made your own cake and then served it at dinner without telling anyone what day it was. Nobody even asked why there was cake. I wanted to say something so badly, but you gave me that look that said, "Don't you dare." That's when I knew something was seriously wrong with how they treated you. With each conversation and discovery, the truth became undeniable. This $3,100 charge wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. It was the culmination of a lifelong pattern, one that would continue indefinitely unless something changed. And that something had to be me. For the first time in my professional life, I called in sick to work. My body seemed to physically reject the realization of how I'd been used, manifesting an insomnia, loss of appetite, and anxiety attacks that left me gasping for air. The woman who prided herself on reliability and composure found herself unable to stop crying long enough to maintain a professional phone conversation. My Seattle friends rallied around me with a protectiveness that made me realize how actual love should feel. Zoe came over with groceries when she learned I hadn't eaten in a day and a half. Mark and Danielle took turns checking on me, offering their guest room if I needed a change of scenery. Keisha, true to form, sent a no-nonsense text. Family can be the worst. You're better than all of them combined. Want me to hack their credit scores? Just say the word. Their support was a revelation: care without calculation, concern without obligation. It made the contrast with my blood relations even more stark. The emotional cycle was exhausting: grief for the family relationship I'd never actually had but always hoped for. Rage at the decades of manipulation. And most surprisingly, a shocking clarity that felt like emerging from a fog. It was as though I'd been watching a distorted image my entire life, and suddenly someone had adjusted the focus. During this time, I connected with my former mentor from my first marketing job, Alicia. When I haltingly explained what was happening, she shared her own experience with family financial exploitation. My siblings didn't talk to me for 3 years after I stopped paying for everything, she said. Now we have a relationship based on actual mutual respect. The silence was worth it. I remember the exact moment when my tears turned to resolve. I was standing on my apartment balcony watching the Seattle skyline sparkle against the night sky. A text from my mother had just arrived. "We need your flight information for Hawaii by next week. Economy is fine since you're paying for yourself, of course." The presumption, the entitlement. The complete dismissal of the fact that I had never agreed to this trip, it crystallized something in me. I deleted the message without responding and took a deep breath of the cool night air. Something had shifted. The next day, I made a list of possible responses ranging from complete submission, pay the money, apologize for the misunderstanding, and continue the cycle to cutting contact entirely. Each option came with consequences I needed to weigh carefully. Financially, the $3,100 would significantly deplete my emergency savings. I had been planning to use that money for a course that would advance my marketing credentials. Paying for a trip I wouldn't attend meant sacrificing my own future for people who couldn't even remember my birthday. Emotionally continuing this pattern would cost even more. Dr. Landry had asked me to envision how I'd feel in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, if nothing changed. The thought of facing the same exploitation at 42 was unbearable. I consulted a financial advisor about establishing clear boundaries. Family financial entanglement is one of the leading causes of long-term financial instability, she told me. Your parents are approaching retirement age. Without clear boundaries now, their financial expectations of you will likely increase, not decrease. My next therapy session focused entirely on family financial abuse. Dr. Landry helped me see how my role as provider was not a choice I had made freely, but a position I had been maneuvered into through subtle manipulation over many years. Your family has confused love with utility, she explained. They love what you provide, not who you are. That's why your absence doesn't register, but your wallet always does. I needed space to process everything, so I booked a weekend meditation retreat at a center outside the city. For 2 days, I disconnected from all communication and focused on gaining perspective. The quiet helped me hear my own thoughts clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. During a writing exercise, I poured out my true feelings without filtering them through the lens of family loyalty. The raw emotion on those pages shocked me. There was so much anger, so much hurt, that I had suppressed under the guise of being the responsible one. But there was also strength I hadn't recognized before and a deep longing for authentic connection that my family relationships had never satisfied. I had conversations with other retreat participants about healthy relationships. One woman described how she had rebuilt her relationship with her parents after establishing firm boundaries. The first year was the hardest, she admitted. They tested every limit through every guilt trip in the book at me. But eventually they realized the old methods weren't working anymore. Our relationship now is completely different, smaller in some ways, but more genuine. Back in Seattle, I researched emotional manipulation and financial abuse, recognizing my family's tactics in psychology articles and support group testimonials. The patterns were so common, so predictable, that it was almost comforting, not because what had happened was okay, but because I wasn't alone, wasn't crazy for feeling exploited. The moment of absolute clarity came during a solo hike. I had reached a viewpoint just as the sun was rising over the mountains. Standing there watching the world illuminate gradually before me, I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't change my family, but I could change how I responded to them. And for the first time, my response would prioritize my well-being over their expectations. I would send a message they couldn't ignore or reinterpret. One that would fundamentally change our relationship forever. I spent 3 days planning my response. My first instinct was to write a scathing letter detailing every instance of exploitation and emotional neglect I could remember. I drafted it all 10 pages and then deleted it entirely. Cathartic, but ultimately ineffective. People who had selectively ignored my needs for 32 years wouldn't suddenly develop self-awareness because of my eloquent rage. Dr. Landry suggested a different approach. The most powerful boundary setting doesn't require lengthy explanation, she said. It's clear, concise, and unambiguous. And most importantly, it's backed by action, not just words. I researched banking policies and transaction disputes. Since my mother had used our established payment request system, technically I had authorized the transfer, even though I hadn't known what it was for. This was a gray area legally, but morally it was crystal clear theft. I documented all communications meticulously. Screenshots of text messages, recordings of phone calls legal in Washington state with one-party consent and emails. Not because I planned legal action, but because I knew my family's tendency to rewrite history would kick into high gear when challenged. My therapist and friends helped me realize that a reactive emotional response would only fuel the family drama machine. Instead, I needed to act with quiet dignity, making a statement through actions that could not be misinterpreted or dismissed. After careful consideration, I crafted a plan that would communicate my boundary in the clearest possible terms. First, I visited my bank and spoke with a personal banker about the situation. While I couldn't dispute the charge as fraudulent, I could close that particular joint payment system to prevent future unauthorized transfers. The banker helped me establish new accounts with enhanced security features that my family couldn't access. Then came the symbolic gesture that would become the turning point in our relationship. I wrote a check to my mother for exactly $1. Not in anger, not as a petty gesture, but as a clear statement. This is all I owe for a trip I wasn't invited to attend. With the check, I included a short typewritten note. This is all I owe for trips I'm not invited to. Do not contact me unless you're ready to acknowledge the pattern and change. No emotional appeals, no list of grievances, just a clear boundary and consequence. I mailed it with delivery confirmation so I would know exactly when it arrived. To prepare for the inevitable backlash, I set up an automatic response email for any messages from family members. I am taking time to reassess our relationship. I will reach out when I'm ready. Please respect this boundary. I adjusted my phone settings to send family calls directly to voicemail and created a special folder for their messages that I could check when emotionally prepared. On social media, I changed privacy settings and muted all family accounts. I wasn't ready to unfriend or block them, that felt too final at this stage, but I needed protection from the guilt-inducing posts that would surely follow. Finally, I had proactive conversations with two cousins I was still close with, explaining my situation without asking them to take sides. I'm setting some boundaries with my immediate family, I told them. If they try to use you as messengers, please just tell them to respect my request for space. Both were surprisingly understanding, with one admitting she had noticed how my parents treated me differently from my siblings. The response was immediate and exactly as predicted. Within hours of my mother receiving the check, my phone exploded with notifications. Voicemails, texts, emails, the full arsenal of family communication deployed at once. My mother's messages evolved from confusion. There must be some mistake with this check, to anger. After all we've done for you, this is incredibly disrespectful. To desperate apologies. Please call me back, sweetie. We can work this out. My father's approach was more authoritarian. This childish behavior needs to stop immediately. Call your mother before this gets out of hand. James sent a series of increasingly concerned texts. Mom's really upset Renee. What did you do? Then, okay, I get you're mad about the trip, but this is extreme. And finally, look, I know they shouldn't have charged you without asking. Can we talk about this? Amanda predictably took our parents' side entirely. You're breaking Mom's heart over a stupid vacation. Is your pride worth hurting the whole family? The most shocking development came 3 days after I sent the check. My father, who rarely traveled for non-business reasons, flew from Denver to Seattle and showed up at my apartment building. Thankfully, the security system required resident approval for visitors, which I declined. He stood outside for nearly an hour before leaving, sending angry texts about wasting a plane ticket to fix your mess. Extended family members soon joined the campaign. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to throughout the year suddenly had strong opinions about my heartless treatment of my parents. It seemed my mother had mobilized the entire Thompson phone tree to pressure me into backing down. One cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged, "Your mom showed me the $1 check at Easter dinner. Everyone's talking about it. She was crying the whole time." The fact that they had apparently discussed me at a family gathering I hadn't been invited to only reinforced my decision. My most sympathetic cousin Rachel secretly sent screenshots of the family group chat discussions about me. The messages ranged from concern to cruel, with my mother positioning herself as the heartbroken victim and my father demanding someone talk sense into her. What struck me most was how they discussed me as a problem to be solved rather than a person with valid feelings. Throughout this onslaught, I maintained my silence. Each message, each voicemail, each attempt to provoke a response only confirmed what I already knew. They were interested in restoring the status quo, not understanding why it had been broken. 2 weeks into my silence, my mother's theatrical approach escalated. She called Zoe how she got her number I'll never know, claiming to be worried about my mental health and suggesting I might need professional help. Zoe, bless her, replied that I seemed mentally healthier than ever since setting boundaries. Then came the family nuclear option. My mother developed mysterious stress-related health issues that were, according to my father's urgent messages, directly caused by my actions. She had allegedly been to the emergency room with chest pains, though she recovered remarkably quickly when the doctor found nothing wrong. The Hawaii vacation, the one worth charging me $100 for, without my knowledge, was suddenly canceled. "No one feels like celebrating now," my father wrote. "I hope you're satisfied." The implication was clear. I had ruined everything, and the family's disappointment was entirely my fault. Financial issues began surfacing as well. Without my contributions, certain family expenses apparently couldn't be covered. Amanda called to complain that she would have to pay for Mom's birthday dinner since "you've decided you're too good for family now." James mentioned that the annual family photography session might be scaled back because things are tight right now. The manipulation was so transparent that it would have been laughable if it weren't so sad. They were showing me exactly how much they had come to depend on my financial support, while simultaneously blaming me for their inability to adjust their expectations. A surprising shift occurred about a month in when extended family members began questioning my parents' version of events. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called to check on me. Instead of delivering the expected guilt trip, she listened as I briefly explained the situation. "Your mother always did have a selective memory," she said finally, "and Robert enables her worst tendencies. I'm sorry, Renee. I think we all knew they treated you differently, but it was easier not to say anything." My mother's brother reached out next with a similar message of support. "For what it's worth, I think what you did took courage. Diane's been running roughshod over people for years. Maybe it's good someone finally called her on it." The most unexpected development came when James showed up at my apartment 6 weeks after I sent the check. This time I allowed him up. He stood awkwardly in my living room, looking around as if seeing my life for the first time. "I didn't know your place was so nice," he said finally. "You've never visited before," I pointed out. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. "I've been thinking about things, about how Mom and Dad treat you versus me and Amanda. It's pretty messed up." We talked for hours that day. James admitted he had always noticed the differential treatment, but had benefited from it, making it easier to ignore. "You were always so capable," he said. "I guess I figured you didn't mind being the responsible one." Nobody wants to be taken for granted, James. Nobody wants to be valued only for what they can provide. He left with a better understanding of my perspective, though not quite ready to challenge our parents directly. Still, it was progress. A week later, I received a text from Amanda that shocked me. "I'm sorry about your birthday. That wasn't right." Just that one sentence, nothing more. But from Amanda, who had never apologized to me for anything in her life, it felt monumental. Maintaining firm boundaries during this time wasn't easy. The guilt tactics were sophisticated and targeted my deepest insecurities. There were moments I nearly broke my silence, nearly gave in to the urgent need to explain myself to make them understand. But each time I reminded myself that understanding had never been the issue. They understood perfectly well, they just didn't like the new terms of our relationship. My support system was crucial during this period. My friends checked in regularly, providing distraction when needed and listening when I needed to process. My therapist helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced as I held my ground. Workplace understanding was another unexpected blessing. When I finally shared an abbreviated version of what was happening with my manager, she was surprisingly supportive. "Family stuff is real stuff," she said. "Take the time you need. The work will be here." That simple acknowledgement of the legitimacy of my struggle meant more than she probably realized. Through a support group Dr. Landry recommended, I connected with others who had established difficult boundaries with family. Their stories helped normalize my experience and provided practical strategies for maintaining my resolve through the hardest moments. The most surprising allies came from within my extended family. Cousins I had been close to as a child, but had drifted from in adulthood, reached out with messages of support. Several admitted they had always seen how my parents treated me and had felt uncomfortable about it for years. The first holiday season during this estrangement was both challenging and liberating. Instead of flying to Denver for the traditional Thompson Thanksgiving, where I would have cooked most of the meal, while others watched football, I joined Zoe's family gathering. Her parents welcomed me warmly, and her siblings treated me as an honored guest rather than free kitchen help. We played board games after dinner, and no one commented on my appearance, career choices, or relationship status. It was revelatory. For Christmas, Mark and Danielle invited me to join their ski trip to Vermont. I had always loved winter sports, but rarely got to enjoy them during family holidays because I was too busy managing everyone else's experience. Speeding down the slopes whined in my face, and not a single family obligation in sight. I felt a joy so pure it brought tears to my eyes. While my family slowly processed the new reality, I experienced tremendous personal growth during this period of estrangement. Therapy became a cornerstone of my week with Dr. Landry, guiding me through the complex grief of mourning a relationship that had never been what I pretended it was. "You're not just setting boundaries with your family," she explained during one breakthrough session. "You're setting boundaries with the part of yourself that believed their treatment was all you deserved. That's the harder work." She was right. Decades of conditioning had convinced me that love was something to be earned through service and sacrifice. Accepting that I was worthy of respect simply for existing, not for what I could provide, was a profound paradigm shift. With the time and emotional energy previously consumed by family drama, I discovered new interests and rekindled old passions. I joined a community garden, remembering how much I had loved working with plants before my mother commandeered that hobby as her own. I took a pottery class, creating imperfect but personally meaningful pieces. I even tried rock climbing, surprising myself with my physical capability. My personal life flourished as well. 6 months into my family estrangement, I met Daniel at a friend's dinner party. Unlike previous partners who had been drawn to my caretaking tendencies, Daniel was attracted to my newfound confidence and self-respect. He respected my boundaries from the beginning, never making me feel selfish for having needs or expressing preferences. On our third date, he asked about my family. I gave him an honest but concise explanation of our complicated relationship. Instead of the discomfort or judgment I expected, he simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. It sounds like you're making healthy choices for yourself." That response told me everything I needed to know about his character. Professionally, the boundary-setting skills I was developing personally translated into workplace confidence. I stopped volunteering for every project, carefully considered requests before agreeing, and advocated for my ideas more assertively. 3 months later, I was offered a senior position with more creative control and a substantial salary increase. With my improved financial situation, I moved to an apartment I had previously considered too expensive, a light-filled corner unit with a view of Elliott Bay. As I unpacked my belongings in the new space, I realized how many of my previous decisions had been influenced by the scarcity mindset my family had instilled in me. I had always lived below my means, not for prudent saving, but because I subconsciously knew my family would claim any excess resources I accumulated. Throughout this period, I kept a journal documenting my emotional healing process. The early entries were raw with anger and hurt. Gradually, they evolved to show more compassion both for myself and eventually for my family. I began to see how my parents' own upbringings had shaped their behavior, how my siblings had been caught in the same dysfunctional system I had. Understanding didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me release some of the bitterness that had been poisoning me. 6 months after the $1 check, my mother sent a letter, an actual handwritten letter on stationery, something she hadn't done since confirming my college acceptance. I let it sit unopened on my coffee table for 3 days, gathering courage to read it. When I finally did, I was surprised by its content. Unlike her previous communications, this letter contained no accusations, no guilt trips, no demands. Instead, it acknowledged simply and directly that she and my father had taken me for granted for years. She admitted they had treated me differently from my siblings and had come to see me primarily as a resource rather than a daughter. There were no excuses offered, just a straightforward acknowledgement of the pattern. "We didn't forget your birthday," she wrote near the end. "We chose not to acknowledge it because we were angry that you had been establishing boundaries. That was cruel and inexcusable. I am deeply sorry." The letter concluded by stating that she would respect my need for distance and would be ready to talk whenever, if ever, I felt ready. She signed it simply, Mom, not the formal mother she had used throughout my adulthood when displeased with me. I showed the letter to Dr. Landry, half expecting her to warn me about manipulation tactics. Instead, she said, "This shows genuine reflection. It doesn't undo the damage, but it's a meaningful first step." 2 weeks later, my father sent an email. Unlike my mother's emotional eloquence, his message was awkward but sincere. He acknowledged that he had enabled a family dynamic that had hurt me. "I always told myself I was keeping the peace," he wrote. "I see now that peace for some came at your expense." The most surprising part was his closing line, "I've started seeing a therapist. Should have done it years ago." James called around the same time, sharing that our parents had begun attending family therapy sessions. "It's weird to see Dad talking about feelings," he said. "But good weird, you know." Amanda's evolution was slower but equally significant. She sent a text asking if she could call me just to catch up, no family stuff. Our subsequent conversation was stilted at first but gradually warmed as she shared stories about my niece without the usual competitive undertones. Before hanging up, she said, "I miss you, Renee. Not what you did for us. Just you." 8 months after sending the $1 check, I received a letter from my mother that took my breath away. Unlike her previous communication, this one included no justifications or excuses. It simply outlined the patterns she now recognized. "I expected you to be an adult when you were still a child. I burdened you with responsibilities your siblings never had to bear. I treated your resources, time, money, emotional energy as community property while allowing James and Amanda full autonomy over theirs. When you tried to establish healthy boundaries, I punished you with emotional withdrawal. I have failed you as a mother in fundamental ways, and no apology can undo that damage. All I can do now is acknowledge the truth and commit to change." My father's attempt at reconnection came in his own way. He called one afternoon, and instead of launching into family business as he normally would, he asked if I would be willing to meet him for coffee the next time I visited Denver. "No agenda," he promised. "I'd just like to hear about your life in Seattle. The real version, not the edited one you always felt you had to give us." Extended family gatherings began to shift as well. At a cousin's wedding I attended 9 months into this journey, relatives who had initially judged my actions harshly now approached with respect. My boundaries had forced everyone to reconsider the family dynamics they had previously accepted without question. Exactly 1 year after the birthday they forgot the one that had catalyzed this entire transformation, I received separate birthday messages from every immediate family member. Not generic greetings, but thoughtful reflections on qualities they appreciated about me. My mother sent a small package containing a vintage photo of me at age 6 playing piano at my first recital. "You were always extraordinary," she had written on the back. "I'm sorry I ever made you feel otherwise." The most meaningful surprise came 2 days later when I received a video call from James and Amanda. They were together at James's apartment looking uncharacteristically nervous. "We've been talking," James began, "about how things were growing up and how differently Mom and Dad treated you." Amanda nodded. "We benefited from that imbalance our whole lives without ever acknowledging it. That wasn't fair. We wondered," James continued, "if you might be willing to meet us in Seattle next month, just the three of us, no parents. We'd like to really talk about everything, and maybe start building something new." That meeting did happen at a quiet restaurant near Pike Place Market. For the first time in our adult lives, my siblings and I had honest conversations about our shared childhood from our different perspectives. There were uncomfortable moments and some tears, but also genuine connection that had never existed before. James admitted he had always felt somewhat inadequate next to me. "You were so capable at everything. I think Mom and Dad's different treatment of us partly came from their assumption that you didn't need them like Amanda and I did. It was wrong, but I think in their twisted way they thought you were stronger than us." Amanda's revelation was even more surprising. "I was jealous of how competent you were, how you never seemed to need approval the way I did. So when Mom and Dad would undervalue you, part of me was relieved because it meant I might measure up for once. I'm ashamed of that now." Their honesty allowed me to share my own complicated feelings, how I had both resented and loved them, how protecting them had become part of my identity, even as it drained me. For perhaps the first time ever, we saw each other as full-flawed human beings, rather than the roles we had been assigned in the family system. 2 years after the birthday that changed everything, my relationship with my family looks completely different. It's smaller in some ways. I no longer organize family events or serve as the emotional glue holding everyone together. But what remains is more authentic than anything we had before. My parents now visit Seattle twice a year, staying in a hotel, rather than assuming they would stay with me. They ask permission before making plans, respect my no, without argument, and make genuine efforts to know the real me rather than the version they created in their minds. Financial boundaries remain firm. I no longer contribute to family expenses unless I personally choose to, and any gifts I give come from genuine desire rather than obligation. The most telling change when I declined to contribute to a recent family event, there was no guilt trip, just simple acceptance of my decision. My relationships with James and Amanda have deepened in ways I never thought possible. James calls regularly, just to check in with no ulterior motive. Amanda now sends thoughtful text messages about things she knows I care about. Last month, she actually asked for my advice about a work situation, and then thanked me for my input, a small gesture that would have been unimaginable in our previous dynamic. The greatest gift I've received through this journey isn't the improved family relationships, welcome as they are. It's the relationship I've developed with myself. I now recognize my own worth independently of what I provide for others. I can receive love without feeling I need to earn it. I can express needs without shame. I can set boundaries without fear. On my most recent birthday, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. As friends and family mingled, some from Seattle, some who had traveled to be there, I took a moment alone on the balcony to reflect. 3 years ago, I had been forgotten by the people who should have remembered me most. Today, I was surrounded by genuine love and appreciation. The greatest gift wasn't their change, but my unwavering commitment to value myself, something no one can charge for or take away. Have you ever had to send a wake-up call to family members who took you for granted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of self-discovery and healing. Remember that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships to flourish. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to value yourself as much as you value others.